And a lot of these answers of like how is your wealth situation in your life, most of them actually were mentioning this corner here, the spiritual and community, so inner wealth and social wealth, as the most abundant, and the individual wealth and material wealth as the least abundant, or the lacking ones. And I thought maybe this reflects a little bit on the challenges we're having in the community. Like individually, we are kind of manifesting the challenges we have collectively, or maybe it's the opposite. The collective is manifesting the challenges we have individually. And so I don't know if it's worth digging more into it, but maybe like what makes it difficult for us to, or for the ones who express that, who were the majority, to connect with this individuality when we are so community driven, and with material wealth when our values are often of a more community social wealth. So in our values, we're always preaching the values of the whole, to have a decentralized community that will benefit all, that relationships are in first place, culture is in first place. And then maybe we're losing a little bit the balance on the material and how to ground that. So that was just something interesting I noticed. And also on the leadership side, this has been brought up a lot. So someone said this last week, we need to talk about what individual experiences people have and how are we developing the leadership from everyone? How can we impact leadership and give the right tools to give agency? So maybe this is also connected. And this came up in many calls and many working groups for a long time, of how we can spread leadership a little bit more, and that maybe this has been quite centralized. And with the talk we had in the stewards call this week, of like, oh, maybe we have too many stewards, maybe the cost of the stewards to the organization are being high costs, and what are the impact we're seeing right now. So maybe the answer lies under those like threads that are starting to open up, like focusing a little bit more on the individual, a little bit more on the material, and a little bit more on individual agency and leadership for multiple people. So I'll open this like very open question of how does this resonate to you guys, and what are some thoughts here? I'll pass to you, Gideon.
Thanks, Livy. I don't know. I'll just say the thing that's popped in my mind, because it's something I'm thinking about a lot right now. I think that we're struggling with this notion of permissionlessness, right? So that's one of the biggest differences between a DAO and a regular organization, is that anybody can join at any time, and there's no hiring process. And so I think that creates a whole host of problems that are relatively new in the world, right? Like, we can't screen people in advance. We don't want to screen people in advance. That's the design of this structure, permissionless, is like anybody can join. But I think we haven't figured out how to deal with the people who are just showing up, right? We don't know how to plug people in ways that stick. Some people, a small percentage of people actually do stay and engage and get really involved. But there are lots of people who kind of just come in and look and then maybe wander off. And I think that is a little bit related to the pressures that we're facing. It's we don't have the economics yet to be able to really support lots of people coming in. And so we rely on kind of volunteer contributions, but we don't really have good accountability systems for tracking when somebody says, I'm going to do this. How do we know that that's actually going to happen? So it does feel to me like, I don't know, we're facing kind of a challenge of, it feels like there's so much work to do, and we're making traction in certain areas, but it also feels like we're not making traction in other areas, and that a lot of the work is falling onto the shoulders of a relatively small number of people. So I can't diagnose the problem, but I know it feels like these are some of the contributing factors to me. I'll pass to Septimus.
Yeah, thanks, Gideon. I feel like our system overall is, good. That probably do not need, a group of people coordinating to the whole commons. Like I feel like it also do not escalate. Like like the stewards cannot. Imagine like the commons having like I don't know 20K people, like and having like 10 10,000 or 1,000 working groups. Like having stewards all over the place. I don't think that makes sense at all. Like I like more like the approach of having like all these working groups working independently but following same mission, vision, and values, and then like the inevitable goal is like reach like act accordingly to the covenant, because otherwise, like if you do not make proposals according to the covenant, those proposals are not going to pass. So probably we don't need so much coordination between like the work streams. Probably we need probably SAMP and transparency need to coordinate, but probably mm, legal with I don't know with probably with comms, yes, but I don't know, like I don't feel like it's necessary like hyper coordination between with like legal with community, for example. I don't know, like I don't feel like it's necessary, and this is every time we're coordinating like using like everyone's time. That time is money also. So yeah, I would like to see like we evolving into something more like small work streams working independently, and then yeah, like we have like the covenant for a reason. And I'll pass it to Bear.
Yeah, thank you, Septi. So I would maybe kind of disagree with the idea of that we don't need coordination. How I see it, I think it's really interesting because I really go back to this idea of decentralization, and how I see DAOs and all of this space. It's kind of like a network, or like an ecosystem in nature, like a rainforest, for example, that everything works, everything has its own function, everything is coordinated, but not like in a formal or restricted way, but it's like organic, everything grows and organizes in an organic way. I think part of this is kind of like reaching that place. But to reach that place, I think it's really complex, right? Because we're talking about people and about changing systems that they've always been there. And yeah, we might not have the answers yet, right? We are still figuring out how to organize ourselves in a way that is decentralized and transparent and accountable, and that also accomplishes whatever purpose we have in the organization. So I think it's a challenge. And for example, something that I see a lot here is this part of, I would say, maybe like commitment or time from people that you don't really know, like who is part of, for example, each working group. Like it's really hard to tell who is truly committed or how many hours are they committing. How can you rely on people to get things done if you don't really know, right? And I think that's one of the questions to answer, right? How are we gonna deal with that? Because it's not about like going back to traditional organizations where there's like positions and you get that position and you get a contract for a certain amount of time. We don't want that, right? We want that flexibility of people coming and going, and even with that progress still can be done, right? So how I see things is that I think we need to rely more on processes and more on objectives and ideas than on people. I think if we have like a clear objective on whatever we do, any people that comes in, they can like read something, learn really quickly about it, and then they can keep going with the work that the previous person that left did before, right? So trying to achieve that dynamic, but it's hard. I think it's hard. So I'll just pass it to Irene.
At the moment, I'm more like an observer than a knower about everything that's going on. I have taken the approach of popping up in meetings so I can sense. I do like this what you're doing in this DAO. I until the moment I have found that some of the disorientation I have about what's going on, what can I do, where can I participate, how do things get managed, and all of that. I haven't mind about it. It's not been a discouragement because I have this my motive. What has drawn me here, it's like a bigger than just thinking about immediate gains. For me, this experience has a real value into building what I want to build and participate in the world. So, for instance, what you mentioned about the stewards is that a greater cost. What I didn't notice that. So it's something that gets me real curious about. I want to observe more about the stewards' roles. And what you mentioned about people coming and not staying to participate, it's like, I'm settled to stay. I haven't participated yet because I'm sensing, because I don't want to commit to something that I won't be accountable about with myself or with you. But you need to be convinced that this is what you want to build in order to build it. It's not like I arrive and it's done, right? Tell me that it's organized and you don't have conflict. And no, nobody that goes into a DAO goes for that. It's like a willingness to build and to create. So that's, I don't know if you have any questions about my participation. It's like you can ask, but I don't know much. But that's what I can share. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's awesome to have you here with such an open and sensing energy. Yeah, something Bear said popped up, pop. Let me find it here. Here, when you said that, I think we need to rely more on processes and objectives and ideas. If we have a clear objective, everyone that comes in can do something really quick about it. Well, that's the biggest challenge, because when that's the main difference of centralization versus decentralization. Because in centralized organizations, one person could set what is that we should be looking at. Like, what is the clear objective? Someone just comes and says it out loud, and then others start picking things up to do according to that one objective. And when you're in a decentralized organization, like how do I know that the objective I'm thinking is also not as important as the objective the other person is thinking? And then it starts creating this, like, a lot of people are finding a lot of things very important. And we have the mission, vision, and values as a guiding star that we decided collectively, but that also they are quite broad. And then how do we achieve the mission also starts to, how do you call it, ramify again, because people have very different ideas about how we're going to achieve that mission. And then all of those things are costly and require different processes. So I think it's a little bit of that challenge we're going through now. And this reminded me of when I worked in the Genesis DAO, this other community. There was an artist called Joss that she passed a proposal that was the Museum of Unfinished Ideas. And that was so brilliant because she wanted to expose people's failures. Like, I want to put on a wall everything that you started and you didn't finish. And that was it. And it passed as a proposal, and that happened. But then after that, I kept thinking of how amazing it would be to have a live museum of unfinished ideas, that people could just come and continue the work of others. Like, we have an exhibition of everything that was once started and that people couldn't follow up with. But then there is, maybe we could even have, I don't know, a Zen hub board or like a GitHub or repository or something, that if you had an idea, you write there, you write what is the status of it, what is all the documentation, who participated in it, if it stopped, when it stopped, and then someone else could just go there and pick it up and give you the credit, and continue the work. I feel like this is something that is happening a little bit. We're not so aware of all the work that's happening, and a lot of things are falling through the cracks that they could actually be like the amazing thing that will change everything. But then because that person didn't have the capacity, time, or whatever to continue working on that, then that just stops.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, Livy. What about what you were saying about the objective and comparing it with traditional organizations? Yeah, you're completely right, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Like, as a community, being able to agree on an objective that we all share, I think that's difficult because everyone have like their own opinion about what has to be done and what is relevant at the moment or whatever, right? So this idea of objectives, processes, we would have to find maybe a way in which we can all agree on, and maybe this can also relate with what Septi was saying, right? Like a network, it's also composed from like bigger cells, but then like also smaller cells, right? So this idea of having smaller groups where more specific objectives can be worked on, and then that once that objective is accomplished, it will affect like a bigger scope of a bigger work or whatever, you know. So that way maybe the work can be more like focused, no, on a certain thing, and the people we will able to have more control over it, right? It will be more independent and it will be more free in a certain way, I would say. And then you also have on the other side this topic about resources, right? Because then we can have, for example, have this museum that is great, but then how are we gonna decide on the resources that we have? Where are they gonna go, to what project, who's gonna decide that, right? If people start picking up what they think they could continue, that would be great, but the resource allocation, I think it would also be something to consider.
Yeah, let's see. There are a lot of ideas that are resonating here for me. One is Zepti's comment about scaling and how important that is to be able to scale. And I think that this is also tied into this idea that Bear, you're talking about smaller cells folding up into bigger entities. A long time ago in the old organization that I used to run, we tried implementing holacracy, or like a form of holacracy. And in the end, we moved away from it because it was too difficult for us at that time. What we found was that it required a lot of process that we weren't skilled enough in at the time to be able to make it work. But since just recently, I've been looking at I've been rereading Frederic Laloux's Reinventing Organizations book, and it's really good. And it talks a lot about self-directed work teams, and the way to it explains how holacracy actually works. And I actually think that an organization like the TEC, which is pretty good at dealing with complex ideas of coordination, could actually do it. And so I guess what I'm suggesting here is, I'm not suggesting we just embrace holacracy, but I think that self-directed work teams, there's a lot of really good experience out there that others have distilled. They've gone before us on, and we could learn from. Because I think the last point I just wanted to reemphasize something that Bear said, which is we don't want to go backwards to centralized like power-centric organizations. Like that's not the future. But we haven't figured out that future. Like we don't know how accountability, at least here in TEC, we haven't quite figured that out yet. And I think that once we figured out that problem, things are going to feel a lot better. Bless you, Olivia.
Thank you. Hi, Durgadas. Yeah, I think accountability really hits the problem in the head. It's one of the, if I had if I started to put my paintings up on the Museum of Unfinished Ideas, an accountability mechanism would be one of them, because again, in the Genesis DAO, I think the biggest failure we had was because of a lack of accountability. And since then, I haven't seen in the DAO space a good accountability measure. We still don't have escrow mechanisms that are very easy to use, like having the funds being released only when the project is completed. For example, most of the DAO grant tools are still, you need to, you receive the funds in advance, and then you do the work, and then you deliver the work. And that most of it is tied into cultural reputation. And that's how we expect people will fulfill the work. And also, I think in the day-to-day stuff, lack of accountability creates a lot of bureaucracy. Like, I think in general, the root of bureaucracy is lack of accountability, because then we try to pile up on processes to make sure that things will happen as they were announced that they would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So now that you're saying that, I go back for like one of the reasons that I really loved all of this technology and blockchain. It's exactly that, right? It's accountability. And what's one of the biggest problems in our world with politics, with politicians, with people promising things are and not being accountable for, right? So when I realized that blockchain allowed you to have a certain type of accountability, I said, wow, like that's amazing, because the technology is kind of here. We are able to track certain things that we were unable to do before. So I think that's just fantastic. I think now it's maybe a matter of finding a way in which we can use that technology to make it work for other things, not just for like maybe like crypto transactions, right? But for work or for people, right? I don't know. Yeah, I'll pass it to Durgidas.
So I have a different view on this. It seems to me that, I mean, some of you might have seen this this graphic that I made. For me, accountability is only necessary in an abusive extractive system. It seems to me that the word accountability and the idea behind it are like a holdover from that system. If we were to educate and trust create enough, like to use the gravity terms, right? It feels to me then it would be it's sort of inevitable that. So what I'm seeing is that we skip over step 2 here and we go to step 3 and just proclaim ourselves a DAO, but then the educational bits in the middle sort of get left behind. And I know we're trying to do a bunch of these things, but it seems to me that accountability is kind of a failure to educate or onboard or get people aligned enough so that they have all of the different things that they need to get their stuff done. So and I often talk about managing complex change in some of the groups that I'm participating in. So I'm looking for the managing complex change graphic that I have. It's interesting how we talk about um, accountability all the time, but in many ways we don't think about necessarily the roadblocks that a person who would be held accountable might run into in a situation like this, right? So if you have all of the vision, skills, incentive, resources, and action plan to get everything done, then it's perfectly reasonable to hold a single person accountable for that. On the other hand, if if a person's confused or anxious or has resistance to things or is frustrated and can start and stop, you have to be able to not only have accountability, but also to be able to look into the not only accountability on a per person basis, but structurally how where did we not provide the skills or the incentives or the resources or the action plan to get the particular thing done. So I, from my perspective, this is kind of and I think things like liberating structures are, would ritualize the conflict necessary to surface this kind of stuff and make it so that we could focus on what I think we should be focus on, which is this, the process of breaking up and decentralizing power and re-educating ourselves. So to some degree, we need to hold ourselves accountable, but we need to hold ourselves accountable to the right thing, which is, to what degree have we decentralized power? Do we have metrics about that? To what degree have we re-educated people with the DAO philosophy that, and I just, so when we're talking about accountability, I think it goes, a bit further than perhaps we've been talking about it. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks.
I also want to share something regarding this accountability concept, and I honestly feel like accountability is not being a problem, especially on the TC. Like I feel like people is doing what they say they're doing, what is probably not as efficient as that. Is like like you can say I'm doing this recording for I don't know 10K, and then is that efficient? Like I'm being accountable because I'm doing those. I'm doing what I said, and people voted to that to happen. But that doesn't mean that's the efficient way, right? Like if you go, like if you are efficient, like I don't know, like you do it under a market value, like how much this task cost in the market. Probably, I feel like some tasks in the TC are being overpaid, in my opinion. And yeah, I just wanted to share that.
Hi, Edu.
Hello there. Nice glasses.
Thanks. Couldn't escape the glasses anymore.
We talk,
Go ahead,
I
Zach.
was just going to introduce to talk like we're talking about accountability in the TC and the methods we're using and how good are we on that. If you want to comment something.
Thank you.
I think, I think that's a very interesting topic, and thanks for the different perspectives to it that we had. I think what you're saying, Durgadas, also relates to what we were talking about in the beginning of the call, that it seems from the answers that we got that people feel like their wealth belongs more to the spiritual and community side rather than the individual and material side, at least from the majority of the people we heard last week in Softgov. And I think lack of accountability is a symptom of somehow forgotten individual autonomy, agency, material. Like it's related to that part. And I think in general in society, this feels like we only relate to the individual as in individualistic instead of relating to the individual as part of the whole. And I think accountability is this individuality that is integrated to the whole because you're accountable to others. And so it creates a self-responsibility. So you see yourself as yourself, but you see that you're integrated in a system, that it's greater than you and that influences you. And then this feedback loop is part of the accountability process. So maybe there's something on the self-development side that we could start to look at to understand accountability more from this not just as a symptom, like you said, Durgadas, but as something deeper there.
We'll see if I can just. So the reason why I'm saying step number 2 is so important is because I feel like in order to do the thing that you just said, that's the step number 4 in my thing, which is to be deliberately developmental. So everyone is then grounded in where their ground feeling about themselves and the community they're participating in is decentralized. And I don't think everybody has that feeling, right? And it because the culture, the wider culture they're participating in is still highly centralized and getting worse and getting more extractive and more oppressive every day. And so how is it that we can educate and offset our place, not just as a coping mechanism for that, but as a real sort of growth pattern to sort of lead the way, right? So it's one thing to say that we've got an environment here where everyone's nice and you have different things, but is that just a like a coping mechanism, or is that real growth, right? And so I think we need to be able to make distinctions of that nature. Like, is it protective use of force or is it violence, right? Is it a coping mechanism or is it real, change, right? So, these kinds of things, I'm trying to, the graphic that I recently showed here in this meeting is an attempt to kind of show where that sort of thing begins and ends.
This is building off of part of what you were saying earlier, Durgadas, but I think another challenge that we have is related to the decentralized nature of what we're trying to do. And so sometimes to me, it feels like there are lots of different things going on across this community that don't always pull in the same direction. And so just like the old ways of doing things with hierarchy, like positional power, we don't want to copy that. I think we also don't want to have top-down strategies where it's like, oh, here's the vision, everybody do this and everybody align, right? But we still need ways for everybody to align around common vision. And that's part of what gets people excited. Like, if people know what they're doing contributes to something that's much bigger than them, that's one of the most powerful attractors that there is. So this is why, like, the experiment I'm doing with the Sampo strategy, I feel like that was way more top down, like me writing that thing, than I would like, ideally. But one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this Polis tool is that I think that tools like that can help us to assess, almost like pull together an intersubjective reality, right? This is what everybody thinks about this set of strategies. Oh, there's real disagreement about this part of it. Okay, let's change that part and try to come together on a unified strategy that everybody has participated in and agrees in and buys into, and then they can see how their work fits into that. I think that this is another piece of the challenge here.
Well, in a DDO organization, what you would do is you would have tools to compare the mission that you're all on with the self-development of the individuals participating in the system. So, for example, I'm a person that talks a lot. So maybe if we created a tool for participation in token engineering commons, I could have you guys all have an app saying Regis kept his trap shut today, and that's against his general nature. So I'm going to reward him for that. Do you see what I'm saying? And so, like, you know what I'm saying? Just because then that would help with my self-development. I would help with my own listening. It would help me, but it would also, bring a balance generally to the organization and to the meetings and this and that. You see what I mean? So it's where those two things sort of match up. But it seems to me that if I just do a poll, there's going to still be a lot of people who are coming from this extractive mindset. I'm still bothered by the fact that we still call this soft governance instead of collective decision making. It is a very different view on what governance is. It feels top down. It feels, like the old system to me versus, collective decision making. So, there are small things you could do to sort of make those kinds of adjustments. So anyway, I've said enough about that. Thanks.
I agree with Durgaras. I feel that externally, governance it's easy to understand, but internally, decision making for me it's what this sounds better and it feels more real. The decision making title rather than soft governance or governance, because it is governance. It still is a hierarchy. It still feels like, even if we sort of try to explain that this is not the case and so on, it is still, I don't know, it still feels perceived as like, hierarchical stuff. So I really like, in fact, I have sometimes slip out the concept of decision making in some of the onboardings rather than soft gov, because I feel it collectively it's easier to understand that it's open, that we have an open governance and that everyone can participate and everyone can engage, and that we are just mediators on the decision making rather than anything else. Back to you, Livy.
Oh, that's an interesting feedback. I don't feel that about this name. Something that I reflected on the name soft governance was that is it soft opposed to something that is hard, and then what is hard is on chain, and then if it's on chain is immutable, and that's why is it hard, or does it feel like it has some type of a masculine quality to it, like if something is on chain, that is numbers and a very clear cut decision, that is hard governance, and if it's something that requires a little bit more of the skills that we usually like portray that have something to do with the feminine, of like being soft and working with vulnerability and with relations. And that was just one thought I had about soft governance, but it passed. I don't know. I don't have this conflict anymore. And I like kind of soft governance. I don't feel it's hierarchical. But if there is this general feeling, I think it might be worth a poll of like, how do people feel about the word governance? And does this imply hierarchy just because we come from a governance system that it's very hierarchical, and that's where we got used to this word?
I think just on the initial debate that you had regarding soft or hard, it's the answer itself. Like if you already had this debate within yourself about how it will look masculine and no, it's because the same concept brings that doubt. Whether decision making doesn't bring that doubt because it's open, it's non-gender, and it doesn't offer any kind of confusion. Whether soft or open or hard governance brings this confusion, and if I feel like intuitively that's where it brings me. Back to you.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Let's think more about it. Maybe we change names or small revolutions. What is there anything else anyone wants to share from everything we talked? And also, I wanted to ask since we've been talking about that, and that was one of the initial topics of the shared leadership and rotative facilitation, I want to ask if anyone would like to facilitate this call next week, and if there is any last topics you want to bring up.
Livy nominated to lead the next call.
Wait, Livy, are you saying you're not gonna? I'm sorry, I missed it for just a second there. Are you saying you're not gonna be here next week, or are asking somebody to stand in?
No, I'll be here. I'm just asking if, since we're talking about leadership and rotative facilitation, if there's anyone that wants to facilitate next week. If not, I'm happy to do it, but also the space is open.
You can do it. I'm encouraging other people to do it. It's not a big deal. You'll feel better after you've done it.
Has everyone taken the role of facilitating this meeting?
We're
I
trying to give
think
people permission to do that. Yeah.
I think the only other people who facilitated Softgov beside me has been Benz and Edu and Griff and Tam
And Juan
and
did one
Juanca
too.
and Zapti. So quite a lot of people, but it has been mostly me.
I'd be willing to do it in a future time, but this week is gonna be a little bit tight for me. But
Yeah,
you know,
I
I
would
can-
also, except I'm already busy this week.
So I'll do it next week, and if anyone changes your mind, feel free to reach out. So if there's no last thoughts, we can close a little bit earlier.
Thank you, Livy.
Thanks, Livy.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Livy.
everyone.
Always interesting conversations here.
Cool.